You're watching an introduction to consultation analysis and feedback, produced by GP Supervisors Australia and presented by Dr. Simon Hay. We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which this recording was produced, and pay our respects to their elders past, present, future, and their families.
So, no presentation, no talk is complete without learning objectives. But hopefully by the end of this hour, we've covered off on these and we'll see them again later to see whether or not we have. All right, so I'm going to go on and just talk about why I'm interested in GP consultation and consultation analysis. So there is a reason for this image, and 2015, about a month before I was due to start in GP training with my supervisor back in Scotland, I went in for a bit of an extra orientation because perfect timing, my second daughter was due about 3 days after I was due to start as a GP registrar. And I turned up, we did a bit of stuff around orientating me to the practice, a bit around the structure there. But at the same time, he brought out a big pile of books and said, right, I want you to get started reading these books. And all of the books were around the GP consultation. And so there was a big stack, varying ages, some newer text, some older text. Douglas, who was my supervisor at that stage, he left me with them. I thought, what on earth has this guy given me? It's all these old, dusty textbooks, because it was that long ago that it was still textbooks. And so I read through them, and it quickly became apparent that learning about the GP consultation was going to be really important. And that was essentially the start of my journey going through there. And over time of my training, we did a number of ways. We reviewed my consultations, particularly video review, which was a big part of the GP training program in the UK at the time, and I will talk about later. But very quickly, he demonstrated to me that consultation structure is really important. The consultation structure leads to efficiencies. Consultation structure and the use of a good consultation structure can lead to patient-centeredness and sharing of decision-making. And these, having come from a hospital background, and particularly having spent a bit of time in general medicine and ED, were relatively new concepts to me. And I found them really interesting and helped me to move through my training, and became a huge focus of my GP training, along with knowledge, skills, etc. development. So these were the first two books he gave me. Eric Burns' Games People Play, which I'll show another slide about in a minute, and Michael Balance, The Doctor Who's Patient, the Illness, from way back in 1957. Whilst these aren't books that I refer to very often, there are some elements of them that I still use. I certainly found Balance to be pretty heavy going and slightly old-fashioned in the way that it was written, and there were some slightly old-fashioned attitudes, but I found both Ballant and Byrne to be very interesting books. And I'm not particularly good at reading, I have to say. Working through, as I said, about the GP consultation, I believe that, as do all of us, that the approach to the consultation leads to better outcomes for patients and the community. It helps us to be, along with a lot of the things that we've talked about in the past and Simon's talked about rational approach to general practice and appropriate clinical reasoning, has led to us being efficient and cost-effective practitioners. And those consultation models also help us address the patient's agenda as getting ideas, concerns, expectations, and sharing the decision-making. So these are some of the other consultation models. I'll highlight a few of them, but certainly Douglas, my supervisor, got me to look at all of these consultation models, and we looked at which ones would incorporate well into my training. So a little bit more about consultation models, and I actually have on my desk the inner consultation just there. Not that I read it every day of my life, but these are the 5 stages of the inner consultation. Obviously connecting, establishing rapport, and getting an idea of why the patient's there. Things like looking at the curtain raiser, opening gambit, etc. Summarizing, which is often talked about as getting to the point of why the patient has come, eliciting ideas, concerns, and expectations, and a number of other skills in order to summarize the consultation. handing over, which is really about the two agendas, doctor and patient agenda within the consultations, negotiating, influencing and gift wrapping, kind of a certain way of delivering information to them. Safety netting, yeah, that's pretty standard language and all of you would know that. And then probably my favorite bit of this model, and I always talk about this to registrars, is housekeeping. And I remember when I read that book and myself and my supervisor talked about it, the idea of resetting at the end of a consultation, because it's always talked about within general practice that we see a lot of patients, even when we're doing 15-minute medicine or even seeing patients in a half an hour consultation, we see a lot of patients. We've got a lot of high cognitive load. We've got a high amount of stress within our day. But the idea of leaving behind the previous consultation and doing whatever you need to do to get ready for the next one, I think is a really good thing to talk about, not necessarily about that previous consultation, but resetting for the next one. And certainly that's something I talk to registrars both in my practice and my medical education job about. So Pendleton, which is a little bit longer, obviously with no Pendleton around his feedback approach, but as you can see here, there's a number of elements to it: defining the reason, considering other problems, choose with the patient appropriate action for each problem. And certainly the newer models do talk more about the idea of a shared approach to the consultation, achieving a shared understanding of the problem with the patient, involving the patient in the management plan, encouraging the patient to accept appropriate responsibility, and so forth. Those are a couple of, I say the newer models, but as you could see in the previous slides, they're still relatively, well, they're a while ago now, put it that way. I was really unlucky at Adelaide to Outback not to get to meet Roger Neighbour, who came over not long before I started and did a workshop with the medical educators there. And being a GP trained in the UK, Neighbour was obviously highly regarded. And I joked once upon a time that he was the rock star of general practice training in the UK. I don't think he's really a rock star, but it was a bit of a shame that I didn't get to meet the man. And it would have been great to have met him and picked his brain. So going way back to those couple of models from years ago, Burns Games People Play, that you can see with the name that it's a slightly different kind of ethos. But he talks about transactional analysis, which is something that certainly I've thought about a fair bit. And the idea of the states that you're in the consultation, whether you're the child, the adult, or the parent, in my opinion, and the opinion of most people, is that it's probably good to have two adults interacting within the consultation, the doctor and the patient interacting on the adult form, unless obviously the patient is a child. It's always bad when you both end up as children and it's a bit of a tantrum and a bit of a spat. But yeah, so thinking about those states and thinking about how you interact so that it's essentially a shared adult decision-making process. And then going, as I say, right back to balance, doctor, his patient, and illness. So these were essentially the elements of his model. And I do like the point here, the flash, when you realize why the patient is really there. So if they're kind of testing you out before they bring their real problem, it's a bit like the chest pain mentioned at the end of the consultation, just as the patient's leaving. As I say, there's a lot of texts out there. There's a lot of reading. So if you haven't read some of those, I would very much recommend the Inner Consultation, Neighbours Inner Consultation. It shouldn't be too difficult to find a copy of it. Now, I'm calling this real world guidance. And this is, for those of you that haven't seen it, the article that we often get our registrars, in fact, we always get our registrars to read around starting off in general practice, to give them consultation skill tips for new GP registrars. We do a session on the consultation, not a huge amount, at our orientation, where one of our experienced rural GPs does a session on that. I do a session in my small group workshops, but we do also ask the registrars to read and review this. And I've certainly used this as a resource in those registrars that are struggling with the consultation, and I get them to go back and read through it before we do direct observation and some consultation analysis, etc. So this paper, written by Simon and co, talks a bit about some practical real world phases to the consultation. So the idea of preparation, connecting, identifying the patient's agenda, essentially ideas, concerns, and expectations, which we all probably appreciate is really key to a good consultation for most patients. Moving into the more practical elements in examination, managing the uncertainty of general practice, which some of the older models perhaps don't do to quite the same degree, explaining the problem back to them and forming a partnership in management, and then following up and safety netting. So again, about that shared approach to the consultation. And finally, managing time, which is always important. And despite the fact I'm doing a talk about consultation analysis, I'm not the best at time management within my clinical work. And I'm just going to show you this quickly. So this was a set of consultation observation criteria that we used back when I was training as part of the UK GP College to analyse our video reviews. So in the old days, and I understand that this has changed with the new RCGP, but in the old days, we used to send in literally videoed consultations that we had done in the real world with patients, with their consent, of course, and they were assessed against these criteria for the consultation. And you can see there's 13 points that they were assessing us against. And throughout the course of my year as a GP registrar, because we only did 1 year as a GP registrar in the UK at that stage, we video reviewed me, look, at least once a week, if not a couple of times, and even more towards the end. And we trained me to meet these criteria within the consultation and to do it in a elegant, hopefully, although maybe I'm not elegant way. So I'll come back to this because they still use these criteria in a different way now.
Simon, I'll just also make reference to an excellent webinar that Ron Roth, a supervisor down in Victoria, a very experienced supervisor who ran with GPSA, on his approach to the consultation. So that's on the GPSA website, and really worth a look. Kind of an Australian version and an amalgamation of lots of those models. So a really nice local take.
Thank you. So we might move on to analysis. So we'll start off with direct observation. So also known as sitting in, we call them direct observation visits. GPECs, they've been called medical education visits, and obviously ECTVs, there's a whole bunch of names for them. But I always remember them as being sitting in with my supervisor, sitting in with me when I was a registrar. Both colleges mandate it to some degree. So both ACRM and the RCGP mandate it as part of training. Often that's seen as, for some registrars, the reason for doing it. But as it says down the bottom, we know from essentially our completion of training interview and our regular catch-ups with our registrars that it's highly valued by registrars, particularly when it's being done by somebody who's skilled in direct observation. And I'm sure that's the same across all RTOs, that when you get somebody in with you, sits in as a fly on the wall essentially, and sees random consultations that you're seeing in that session, then it gives you such a chance to observe what they're doing from both in terms of consultation structure and consultation skills point of view, but also the content of the consultation in terms of their knowledge and their, to a degree, their clinical reasoning. As I say, is theoretically random in terms of, when I go and visit a registrar, just book it in on a certain day and they book in patients. And it should theoretically be whoever's booked in for that day. We do hear rumours, maybe that's not the right way to put it, that sometimes registrars, when we're visiting them, will stack the session with patients that they know because they think that's going to make them look better. But we do tell them that obviously this is about giving them feedback and giving them the chance to improve. It also gives us the chance to see how safe they are. And we always say to all our supervisors that work with us that it's just so important to get in with a registrar and sit in with them early on. And I'm sure it's preaching to the converted here, because you get an idea of how safe that registrar is, and you get an idea of what work you need to do with them from both a consultation point of view and a knowledge point of view. So I might go to the chat. Why do you think that teaching the different consultation models not seem to form such a big part of early GP training in Australia compared to the UK? I have to say I've kind of wrapped my brain about that over the last 10-ish years since I've been involved in GP training. It was a big surprise when I came into GP training here. There's a lot that Australia does so much better than back home, and that's great. But yeah, the idea of the consultation models not being front and center and not being this kind of revered part of training, I don't honestly know. It's certainly something that whenever I bump into another expat who's a supervisor or a medical educator, in fact, I had an email from one recently saying, could I help you do more training on the consultation? I was really pleased that Simon asked me to talk on it, and something that we are slowly increasing the volume of within our training program, but it's certainly not to the level that I had when I was a registrar back in the day. Just a couple of tools that you can use if you just want to sit in with your registrars, even for just one consultation. If you say, look, at the beginning of the day, look, I'm just going to sit in with you for the first consultation, if that's okay. These tools are quite useful both for having a look at what they've done. They're not necessarily as focused on the consultation structure itself, but they're quite useful as a record, and you can certainly write down what you're observing. So both mini CEX forms for both colleges. So on the left is the ACRM one, and obviously ACRM have mini CXs heavily within their program. And on the right is the RCGP one that's used for PEP. But it's still it's a useful form to use if you're just sitting down with a registrar and you want to give them something with some feedback, if you're using it as a consultation development tool and a way to document what you're doing with them.
There is such a discrepancy in the way that the consultation and the models of consultation have been traditionally taught between the UK and Ireland, and indeed other countries, I think, in Europe and in Australia. And really, just why is that? And I think you're right in saying it's being redressed now, but it's certainly, we're still very, very fledgling when it comes to talking about those established models and the importance. Even talking to you about this webinar and hearing about that transactional analysis approach and thinking, teaching a registrar about that, where do you sit in this engagement? Are some of your consultations parent-child, or are they all adult? I mean, it's just such a rich field.
I mean, I don't know, and I don't want to sound like as I said, I've worked in Australia far longer than I've worked in the UK, and I know my work is here, and this is where I live. Whether or not it's to do with the fact that there has been the formal training program, for my understanding, quite a lot longer in the UK. I could joke maybe it's because it has to be super efficient because of 6 or 10 minute medicine that used to be the, I don't know, it may still be the case in the UK. It certainly was when I was there, was 10-minute medicine for most doctors. I don't think that's the case. I think it's essentially the evolution of the program that has been a prized part of the program, in the same way that Neighbours model is really well known in the UK, but here it's Murtaugh's, essentially his book and his diagnostic approach is really prevalent, equally as important. So video reviews, I freely admit I love video reviews as a tool. I think it's probably, I look back on them with rose-colored spectacles, and I'm a little bit institutionalized with them. As I said earlier, during my training, it was a big focus because it was one of the summative assessments, one of the essentially the exams that I had to do. Back then, you had to essentially sit 2 different types of qualifications. So I had to put in 2 different sets of video reviews for different bodies within the UK. Initially, I absolutely hated it though. I don't like my accent. I realized I was going bald on the back of my head as well as on the front. And I find it really difficult watching myself, as a lot of people do. But with volume of use, it became much more comfortable. And there is some fairly mild research, if that's the right way to put it, that discusses that and discusses the use of video review, particularly in an undergrad setting, but also in a postgrad setting, and how you have to keep using it in order to get comfortable with it. And so, pushing on with it is very useful. There are issues with video review in many jurisdictions across Australia. We've stopped using it in South Australia as a formal use, mainly because we were told there was medico-legal risks around it and the recording, and over the last kind of decade, that's become more of a risk because of the devices being used, potentially uploading to the cloud. And so it's a real shame that we've dropped that. I think it's highly useful, as I say here, because you can stop and start the consultation. You can focus in on a bit of the consultation you really want to coach the registrar around. And it is really a coaching tool, something to often focus in on small bits and help the registrar refine that part. So I often would use it. My supervisor would stop and look at the bit of the consultation where I was trying to check the patient's understanding, so that was better for the patient and it wasn't forced and clunky and just me ticking a box, that it became truly kind of organic and part of my consultation approach. So I found that really useful after a bit of resistance. It's really useful as well, sometimes in registrars who are resistant to change or resistant to feedback, because you can actually get them to watch their behavior as well and how they're consulting. So for instance, we've certainly had people that have been looking at their computer very early in the consultation and have missed patient cues. And so they've watched it back and they've gone, oh my goodness, there's a lot of cues that I'm missing. So now at GPEX, we're using it in a much more focused approach. We're using it in remediation or in registrars who are struggling. And we're actually going a bit old fashioned, and we're using devices that can't sync to the cloud. So we've dug the video cameras out again, and we will send them out to practices if need be. So a little bit old school. One of the big issues is that the video has to be part of the record in some of the jurisdictions, in particular Victoria, for 7 years. So that's put a lot of supervisors off. So luckily we don't have that in South Australia in terms of the 7-year rule, but it could come. And I think that would be a great shame, but check in your jurisdiction what the legalities are. And if you potentially can use it, I certainly would recommend it for use in certain situations. So moving on to our favourite thing, standardised role plays. The good thing about these is that they give you a little element of control, so you can focus in with a bit of reliability on certain parts of the consultation. So you can role play a tricky part of the consultation that the registrar is struggling with and focusing on those areas that they're having difficulty with. As we mentioned earlier, sometimes there's great resistance to role playing both amongst registrars and supervisor. But as Simon said, short role plays are really useful, whether it be 15 seconds, half a minute, just to focus in and really practice parts of the consultation. And almost like Groundhog Day, you can retry that part of the consultation in different ways and go down different paths and see which one fits the registrar's skills and personality. And the really good thing that you can still do is video them. So you could run a role play and then rewind, and with those registrars that are struggling and need to observe, they can be videoed. And the beauty of that is it doesn't break any medico-legal rules in any jurisdiction. So I mentioned earlier about the tool that I was beholden to in the UK, which was the Consultation Observation Tool, or CONT, not completion of training. And this is where it's gone to recently, and you could still potentially use it. If you just search RCGP COT tool, this will take you. And I think this goes through the similar phase of the consultation. It's a bit small to see, but it goes through, it's a bit of a refined approach to that, because it gives you essentially some tick boxes and some points that you can make some feedback on. So not dissimilar to a mini CX from that point of view. And so now this is used in the UK for direct observation, which bizarrely didn't used to be a big part of the program. It was all based upon video review consultation. We certainly have forms that we use on our online system for assessing and recording what registrars are doing within the consultation. Ours are based primarily around the domains of general practice for both colleges. So
GP Synergy certainly had its own version, Simon, which was, I guess, an amalgamation of various other tools. But you mentioned this mini CX, which I think some of the RTOs use.
I think the mini CX, from my point of view, is really useful, more in my clinical supervision job than my med ed job. If I just want to sit in with a registrar, as I say, for just one consult and just say, look, why don't I sit in, we'll give you some feedback and then we can discuss it later. And if you've got a registrar, we do have a registrar at the moment who we're doing a bit of work on from that point of view. It's really quite useful. Move on quickly onto case analysis and discussion. So really, again, I could have put another one of Simon's articles up around random case analysis, which we certainly use on a regular basis. Case discussions, I think, are really so important, particularly in nowadays with the change to the RCGP exams, but also the ACRM exams do look a lot around clinical reasoning and case discussion. But they're a really useful way to do essentially, I've called it here, a paper-based analysis of what's been done in the consultation. And it's a bit of a choose your own adventure. So if when you're doing a case discussion or case analysis, you can essentially decide which way you want to go. You can go down the kind of the pure consultation side of things and get the registrar to analyse what they did and when within the consultation, but also you can analyse in terms of things like their knowledge and their clinical reasoning, which a lot of you would know. And certainly that was, again, probably the other thing that my supervisors did a lot of with me, which was random case analysis. And so I was very, very lucky from that point of view that set me up, this kind of twin pillars, as it were, of consultation analysis and case analysis. And the two of them went very well together. As I've mentioned, random case analysis, the other option is to do problem-based, where the registrars bring their own issues. I won't go into this in too much detail because I'm sure that will be something that will be addressed elsewhere within webinars. But it does give you the chance to also potentially kind of use an approach where you analyze and can then springboard off that and essentially do role play, potentially give them feedback on how they would approach the consultation next time. It's a different tool. It's not the same as a direct observation. It's not the same as a video review analysis, but it gives you a different point of view. And we certainly use this as part of our programmatic assessment framework at GPEX, all these different types of assessments and different approaches to getting in with the registrar and seeing what they're doing, so that we can get a little bit of different information and give them a different bit of feedback. But I probably won't go on about that huge amount. So almost at the end, but a little bit on feedback. I'm not going to talk about this huge amount, but if you're going to do consultation observation, consultation analysis, it's certainly important that you give the registrar feedback. A lot of this, again, is going to be preaching to the converted, so I apologise if this is relatively simplistic, but I know that you're getting discussion on feedback elsewhere. So being specific is really important, giving them little nuggets of what they actually did. That's really quite easy with video review because you're watching, but in other areas, certainly I'll write down little quotes that they've made or little observations. And it doesn't always have to be obviously the constructive or negative feedback. Certainly I give registrars feedback on what they did well and what they should keep doing. So being specific is really useful, not getting overburdened, not kind of getting a list of 15 or 20 points that you want to feedback from a consultation, picking 2 or 3 elements from a consult, if there are, that are really key to focus on that you can get maximum effect from. Being timely, so trying to do it as soon as possible afterwards is really useful because then it's fresh in their mind. Straight away afterwards is best. But if you're super busy and you need to arrange another time to go over it, then trying to do it as soon as possible is always of value. I've put have a chat because I do certainly see feedback as a bit of a chat. It should be relatively friendly. It certainly shouldn't be confrontational. And if you make it relatively kind for the registrars, which I know sounds bad, certainly sounds like I'm from a certain era where feedback from hospital docs was often unkind, then they're more likely to ask for it in the future. If you're writing a report, one thing we always ask our supervisors and our med eds not to do is to put any surprises in the report. Anything that's going in the report should be discussed with the registrar before it goes in the report, unless, of course, you've got serious worries about the registrar and you need to discuss it with your RTO. But then that's kind of a bit outside of the ordinary process. And the last thing I think I've written on here, I've got a couple more things. I've got good is not good. So we often get in our reports from observers that the registrar is good. There's always got to be something that we can give a registrar to help them, even if it's reassuring them about a certain very specific thing that they're doing is good, but just writing good is not a particularly good type of feedback. And finally, we'd had some research a few years ago done by our research team. Jill Benson, some of you may know, led it. And one of the big bits of research around workplace-based assessment we found was, sounds obvious, but flagging and bringing up registrar issues early is really, really important, because what we showed is if a registrar is flagged and issues are identified and dealt with sooner rather than later, they actually end up performing at the same level as their cohort if they're engaged in remediation and internal support plans. I'm just going to show you a little video. It's a little short video. So any video that came to one of the GPSA webinars a couple of times ago may recognize this lady. It's just a little role play. What I'd like you to do is watch this short video. I've said the registrar is approximately 3 months into their first semester of community training. And I want you to think about if you had to give feedback to this registrar about this short section of consultation and focus on the consultation, what would you want to cover?
Lulu? Hi, I'm Dr. Jones.
Hello, Dr. Jones.
Have a seat.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. I'm so sorry I'm running so late. It's been a bit of a hell of a morning. So
Yeah, you are. It's a bit late.
sorry about that. Sorry, Lulu. How can I help?
Well, I wanted to come and see you today just because I've been feeling incredibly tired. I haven't been sleeping. I've had only probably about 5 to 6 hours of sleep a night, and I'm just feeling exhausted.
Okay.
Absolutely exhausted.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay. So you're not sleeping very well?
No, I've had iron deficiency in the past.
Oh, have you? Let me have a. I've just checked my computer. So oh yes, I see you did. 2 years ago, you were iron deficient. And then we checked it again about 4 months later and it was good. So what did you do? Take iron tablets?
I did, yes.
Okay, good, excellent. And the last time you had your iron checked, it was then, so we should probably recheck your iron. What do you think?
Well, we can, but
Yes,
this
okay.
tiredness feels just so different to how I felt when I had the iron deficiency. I'm
Okay.
just so tired.
So you're not sleeping?
No,
What's your diet like?
I think it's pretty healthy.
Okay, any changes in your bowel habit?
No,
Any weight loss?
no.
No, okay. And have you felt like the cold? Like cold seems colder than usual, like cold intolerance or anything?
Not particularly.
Dry skin?
No,
No, what are your periods like?
they're okay.
Regular?
I'd say so, yes.
Heavy?
So I might stop it there because it's, I shouldn't say it's getting a little bit uncomfortable. No rapport. Yeah, excellent. Didn't connect. Let the patient speak. So that was one of the things that I was very much taught in GP training. My supervisor said, yeah, and this really does apply in Scotland because Scottish people love to talk. And I say that I was born there. Be quiet for 2 minutes and they'll give you pretty much everything you need to know. Open-ended question, that's what I was taught. Breathe before you start. I like that. Doesn't appropriately address concern. Repetitive ask open questions, missing cues. So you can see that if you played that back to the registrar, I would hope if they were an engaged registrar who is keen to improve, that they would see their behaviours, that they would look at it and go, oh my goodness, I went straight to the computer. I closed my body language. I asked closed questions. Somebody's mentioned rushes to closure on iron deficiency. You could take this off into a whole clinical reasoning discussion and premature closure and all those types of things. Yeah, I completely agree. The start is critical. Listen and interact. A lot of the time when I'm doing direct observations, I'm watching the body language. I'm watching that open question. I'm watching how quickly they go to the computer. I'm going to sound like an old man. I think a lot of the time, some of the registrars will go to the computer because they have good IT skills. They can touch type. And I often tell them, look, that's great. And that will give you a benefit later in the consultation, but try and concentrate on the patient and connect early on. Yeah, if you can use video review in your jurisdiction, I very much would encourage doing it from time to time because it's a really useful tool for that coaching. It's a really useful tool for those registrars that need to see themselves. So that's all I've got. So hopefully we've covered up on some of that. These are some of the resources that I certainly would recommend. And you know, as I said, if you can get hold of the inner consultation and read it, certainly would recommend it, even if you just find the summary, the Calgary-Cambridge model. I think the being forced to do it was really useful. It was such an important part of my training. So the article that I mentioned that Simon was lead author on is excellent. And I'm not just saying that because you're running this, Simon. It is a superb article. If you're interested, I know this looks like a very old school link, but if you just Google RCGP Consultation Observation Tool, it'll give you a link to that model. Most of these things are just Googleable. You know, obviously the mini CEXs are Googleable. And Again, I'm not saying this just because this is a GPSA webinar, but the guides for feedback and random case analysis in particular are very good and great structures to do that work with your registrars.
I guess I'd just make a last observation. I'm just so pleased that we decided to put this particular topic into this new supervisor workshop, and B, that you were chosen to do it, because it is such a critical aspect of registrar training that I must say I think we've neglected for many, many years in this country. And for you to reflect on your experience as a UK graduate and your work in medical education and really putting it front and centre of registrar training. It's all about the consultation. Everything else hangs off the consultation. The consultation is the primary thing you need to learn. It's such a different focus to what I think we've historically done. And so if that message through your talk tonight permeates the supervisors and others, I think we've met our goals, which is great. And yeah, thanks very much for a really nice sort of rundown of those important elements. I have been to talks on the consultation models before, and I think one of the traps is actually attempting to apply them, assiduously. And I think the nice thing, I think the way you've pitched it really is you read them, you digest them, you synthesize them, and then you kind of just practice in a way that makes reference to them really than trying to kind of assiduously tick off every part. And I guess that would be your observation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wouldn't apply one specifically, but certainly you take bits of each one.
Yeah.
If there was one thing that was my Bible, it was that consultation observation tool, but then that was because assessment drove that. But yeah, everything else I've picked, the idea of the housekeeping is probably the big one for me.
Yeah. So thanks so much. I've learned quite a bit and have been re-inspired to use the models as a really good basis and to teach the importance of the consultation.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, everybody.
And we look forward to seeing you at a future GPSA webinar. So thanks, everyone. Have a good evening and catch you soon. Stay safe.
Thanks for watching. We'd love your feedback. Please comment or subscribe to our YouTube channel for updates on new videos. If you'd like to ask a question or suggest a topic, you can contact us via our website at gpsa.org.au. GP Supervisors Australia is supported by funding from the Australian Government under the Australian General Practice Training Program.